Hi friends, most people think high blood sugar starts with sugar. So solution sounds pretty obvious. Avoid sugar spikes, cut the carbs, check your glucose, and if that number is still high, take more medication. And if that was so simple, why is diabetes out of control? High blood sugar is not just a sugar problem, folks. What if your high blood sugar is actually your body responding to orders? What if the real problem is not that your body hates carbohydrates, but that your muscles, your liver, your fat cells, your gut, and your hormones are sending the wrong signals? And that is why two people can eat the same bowl of rice, the same potato, or the same fruit, and one person has a normal blood sugar response, while the other person spikes and stays high for hours. So the problem is not always that the carbohydrates people are eating. The problem is the metabolic environment that carbohydrate enters. So today I want to show you how to start changing that environment step by step. Now, this is not about buying a supplement or waiting until your A1C gets worse. You can do things today starting with the very next meal and design your meal to optimize your metabolism. Because the first step in reversing insulin resistance is through your food choices. And this is where people get confused. Too many people falsely believe that just cut off all carbohydrates and that'll lower the demand of insulin.
People are eating a lot of junk, they're eating a lot of sugar.
You need to avoid added sugars, and so do whole grains.
Sure, but are you getting insulin sensitive? Not necessarily. Throughout this video, not only will you learn how your metabolism really works, you'll also learn practical things that you can do today to reverse insulin resistance. So believe it or not, it is very possible to get your blood sugars normal within a few days without taking any medications, as long as your body still makes insulin. And so by the end, you will know three things. First, why insulin resistance often starts years before your blood sugar actually becomes elevated. Second, which signals make your body need more and more insulin. And third, what you can do today, literally tonight and this week, to make those signals work for you instead of working against you. Now, don't just stop your medications. Always work with your medical doctor and notify them if you're going to change your diet at all. My name is Dr. Lou, and I'm a double board certified physician. I've been in clinical practice for nearly 30 years. Every physician sees diabetes. It is so common, exploded in the last 3 decades. But even more people are walking around with prediabetes and insulin resistance before they ever get a symptom, before they're ever diagnosed. And frankly, we're all at risk of diabetes because of our food system. Hence the popularity of continuous glucose monitors endorsed by celebrities like Nick Jonas, who, by the way, has type 1 diabetes.
Than he ever dreamed possible.
But type 1 diabetes is not the same disease most adults get. Type 1 diabetes affects less than 10% of people with diabetes and are often an immune or infection-driven process where the body loses the ability to make enough insulin. Type 2 diabetes is completely different. Type 2 diabetes is usually environment-driven. It develops when the body becomes insulin resistant to insulin over time. And the right carbohydrates, when they enter into an insulin-resistant environment, blood sugars are higher for longer. Now, these two diseases share the same word, diabetes, but they are not the same disease. And yet both groups can develop similar complications, especially when they get insulin resistant. So people with type 1 diabetes can need more and more insulin if their body becomes resistant to carbohydrates, like those people with type 2 diabetes, where they make more and more insulin until the pancreas can no longer keep up with demand. So whether you have prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, or type 1 diabetes with rising insulin requirements, the question is not only how do you lower your blood sugars? The better question should be, how do I get my body insulin sensitive? Why is it getting insulin resistant in the first place? Because if you only lower the blood sugar without lowering the demand, you may be managing the symptom while the deeper problem keeps growing. So the first step is literally this: lower the demand on insulin by changing the signals that are forcing your body to need more and more insulin for the same food. Now, that is insulin resistance. So the first signal is constant insulin demand. And that's what happens when the pancreas never gets a break. So if someone You're drinking sweet coffee in the morning, you're eating crackers mid-morning, you're eating white bread at lunch, you're drinking sweet tea in the afternoon, and you're snacking before dinner. Then you're eating desserts with dinner, and then you're eating at night again. The pancreas is being asked to respond all day long. And even if each food looks small, the signal is constant. The body is being trained. And your body is the smartest biological AI you will ever know. Every time you give it input, you're training it. If you snack constantly, your body prepares for constant insulin release. So if you eat late at night, your body is forced to process fuel when it should be really resting. So if you drink sugary beverages all day, your pancreas stays on call. And that is why the first food that you can give up is not all carbohydrates. It is to remove the foods that create the fastest, most repetitive insulin demand. And that first practical step is actually pretty simple. Pick one liquid sugary drink that you love and that you're doing and replace it for 7 days. Just think one day at a time. Not everything, just one drink. So if it's sweet coffee, switch to unsweetened coffee or coffee with less sweetener. If it's juice, switch to whole fruit with water. If it's sweet tea, switch to unsweetened tea. And if it's soda, switch to sparkling water. It is because liquid sugar is one of the fastest ways to keep insulin demand high without giving your body fullness. And your first move is not, I will change my whole entire life today. That's not going to work. Your first move can be, I will remove, I'll just skip this drink. That gives your pancreas one less signal every day. The second signal, refined starches. Give that up, reduce it. So that's usually eaten separate or together with the beverages, right? Think about your donut or your bagel. And that's a food trap. People often say, I don't eat much sugar, and they may not even be drinking sugar, but eating refined starches all day. Bagels, crackers, chips, bread, potatoes, cereal at night. That's not candy, but that's your bloodstream. If you're eating refined products made out of these things, that sugar will enter in quickly, especially if you're eating them without fiber, without structure, and you're not having enough of the good stuff around your foods. So that means you rapidly absorb the sugar. That'll increase your insulin. And here's a practical step. Don't remove all your carbohydrates at once. Just kind of switch your food. So if you buy sugary cereal, try to buy less sugar. Add more whole grains with your cereal. If you have lunch, switch your white bread to like a multi-grain, whole grain bread, like Ezekiel. If you're a snacker, try snacking on edamame, roasted chickpeas, vegetables with hummus. And if dinner is white rice alone, add some beans, vegetables, mushrooms, lentils to replace your rice. Add food with fiber, food quality. Remember, the first rule is not no carbs. The first rule should be no naked carbs, no refined carbs. And when you're going to eat that, eat it with something else so it's not naked anymore. That's how you start lowering your insulin demand without becoming afraid of food. And you're buffering those foods so they don't digest so quickly. So that means you eat high fiber foods first. And if you start training yourself to do that every day, your body gets a chance to reset. Too many people confuse man-made factory creations with real food. And that's why not all carbohydrates are bad, right? If you eat a boiled potato in water, it's not the same as potato chips. So the environment that we live in creates diabetes. And if we go back to the natural environment, we can be free of diabetes. Now, look for foods that have been eaten for eons, not during this current diabetic crisis. So whole fruit is not the same as soda. Beans are not the same as white bread. And oats are not the same as cookies, folks. And potatoes don't come in chips all the time, right? Eat natural foods that come with fiber, mineral, hydrated. They have resistant starch, polyphenols, vitamins, right? And when you eat those fiber, it not only slows digestion, but it feeds your gut microbiome. And that's the third point. We're not eating enough fiber. Fiber is not just something that helps you go to the bathroom. It is a wall to prevent glucose surges, the metabolic fuel that feeds your gut microbiome, which changes your immune system. Your liver, your appetite hormones, and even your insulin response changes when you add more fiber. And for years, people thought the gut was mostly digestion and waste, but your gut bacteria, they're constantly communicating with your body, dictating your metabolism. They influence your inflammation, your hunger, how fast glucose enters your bloodstream. They influence how your liver and muscles respond to the meal you're eating. So when blood sugar is high, your body is not simply broken. It is actually adapting to the environment that you keep creating. So if your gut is mostly getting refined starch, refined sugars, oils, low fiber, snacking all day, basically ultra processed foods, you're giving it a constant signal over and over. Change that signal. Give your gut some beans, some vegetables, oats, barley, fruit, mushroom seeds, and intact whole foods that sends a different set of signals. So here's a practical step. Add one fiber-rich food to anchor one meal today. A fiber anchor means that you clearly bring fiber into your meal. So a lot of people eat salad. It doesn't have a lot of fiber unless you have beans, lentil, chickpeas, oats, barley, berries, mushrooms, ground flax seeds in that salad. Chia seeds, sweet potatoes, right? The whole list goes on and on. Don't just eat lettuce, right? And we're not working for a perfect meal. Just start adding fiber to your meals and eat that first. So if you're eating rice, add beans, eat the beans first. Now, there's a word of caution with the beans. If your gut isn't used to eating beans, you may feel a bit bloated. And if that's the case, start training your microbiome to adjust to a new normal. So you really need to slow down the environment you're giving it, right? Literally, if you have to go down to one bean a meal, do that and work yourself slowly up to a cup of beans. Now, remember, it doesn't have to be boring. You can make hummus with the beans, sprinkle lentils over your pasta, make some Korean pancakes with beans and garbanzo flours. If you're eating toast, add berries and ground flaxseed to the side. If you're eating soup, you can add beans and mushrooms. And of course, if you're eating a snack, choose fruit instead of crackers. So when you start making changes, don't subtract. Add the food that makes your metabolism work better and just crowd out the foods that spike your blood sugars. That's how you make the change feel less like a punishment and more like rebuilding. So number 4 is muscle loss. And that is one of the most important drivers of insulin resistance. This is overlooked so commonly. Muscle is your body's glucose storage tank. You have 650 muscles, and one of their jobs is to help you store glucose after you eat. But when you're losing muscle just from existing, because after 30 you start losing muscles, you lose places for glucose to go. That means more sugar stays in the bloodstream, and the pancreas have to make more insulin to push that glucose somewhere else. And this is why weight loss can help with insulin resistance, but only if done correctly. Insulin resistance doesn't happen because your body hates carbohydrates. It happens when your muscles are compromised, when your liver and fat cells, they stop responding properly to insulin. Insulin is a hormone that moves glucose out of the bloodstream into your cells. That's normal. You need insulin to survive. And every time you eat carbohydrates, your glucose rises, your insulin will rise. That's normal. Insulin tells your muscle to take glucose in. It tells your liver to also store glucose. And it tells your fat cells what to do with extra energy. That's normal and healthy. But think of insulin like the key that helps open the door so glucose can enter the cell. In insulin resistance, the lock gets rusty, so your pancreas makes more keys at first, more insulin. And this works for maybe weeks and years to make your blood sugar normal. And your pancreas is working harder and harder, and eventually it's going to burn out. And high insulin, it's not harmless, folks. High insulin will make it easier to store fat, especially around your belly. It can make weight loss harder. It can drive cravings and hunger, and it is connected to fatty liver, high triglycerides, lower HDL, higher blood pressure, inflammation, PCOS symptoms, and eventually type 2 diabetes and heart disease. Then one day, the pancreas can no longer keep up. It can't make enough insulin to overcome the resistance. So that's when your blood sugar rises, which makes your A1C rise. And suddenly someone hears you have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And that moment can feel shocking because you're probably thinking you're not drinking soda all day. In fact, you gave it up. You're really not doing anything extreme. And some people even think they're eating better. How did this happen? Especially because I gave up sugar. But do you find it odd that you can eat that sugar as a kid and you can't do it as an adult? And of course, you're told to lose weight, cut carbs, and take medication. And that advice is not wrong, it's just incomplete. And that's why it eventually stops working so well. Because insulin resistance is not just about one food group, it's a whole body signal problem. And that's telling the body you're needing more insulin. So losing weight by itself, let's say you lose 10 to 50% of your body weight, that significantly can improve insulin resistance for many people until your body adapts. And the side effect of weight loss, though, is muscle loss. So unless you actively work to bring up your muscle mass, eventually that's going to fail, right? So too many people, they diet, they fast, they take medications, they lose weight, and they're losing their muscle mass and they're wondering why things backfire. If you lose your muscle, sure, you may weigh less, and sure, your glucose storage capacity will initially be a little bit better, but then it will go down. And skinny people can also get a lot of wrong fat. So the goal is just not losing weight, looking skinny. The goal is to lose the visceral fat, the bad belly fat, improve your muscle mass. This is why resistance training for everybody is not optional. So here's your practical step. After your next meal, use muscles for 2 minutes. Yeah, you don't have to go to an hour. You don't have to have a gym membership. Just at least 2 minutes. What is that? Like 10 chair squats, 10 push-ups, marching in place, walking around the block, or climbing the stairs. Do a few resistance bands in rows, right? The goal is to send glucose somewhere useful. And when your muscle contracts, they pull the glucose out of the bloodstream more efficiently. So that means your muscles, they will help lower your glucose burden without asking your pancreas to work harder. So if you want one of the simplest insulin resistant habits, do this. Eat, then move, especially after you ingest any kind of rapid carbohydrate. Again, walking, squats, wall sits, leg lifts, resistant bands, push-ups, rows, planks, step up, or, weights, they all are different forms of movement. But don't hurt yourself. Start slow. If you have no idea how to do it, get a physical therapist or a trainer. Don't ignore your muscles because your muscles are one of the most powerful organs in reversing many metabolic diseases, especially insulin resistance. So signal number 5 is ignoring your liver and making it work overtime. And this is where diabetes becomes very confusing for people. Many people wake up with high blood sugars, but they wonder how their sugar is high because they're not eating anything overnight. But your blood sugar is not only coming from the food you just ate. It can also come from your liver. So when you're not eating, your liver can release glucose so your brain doesn't go into coma. That's normal. But in insulin resistant, the liver somehow keeps releasing glucose even though blood sugar is already high. And normally insulin will tell the liver, hey, stop releasing glucose. We already have enough. At the same time, glucagon, the hormone that raises blood sugar, that should be going down. But insulin turns the liver glucose production down, and glucagon turns the liver glucose production up. But in type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, that balance breaks. The liver becomes insulin resistant, so it doesn't hear the stop signal clearly. At the same time, glucagon stays too high, so the liver keeps pouring glucose out in the bloodstream. And that is why fasting blood sugar can be high before breakfast ever touches your mouth. And this is one of the most important ideas in diabetes. High blood sugar is not only a food problem, it is a liver signaling problem. And this is why many people with diabetes benefit from metformin. Now, metformin does not mainly work by forcing the pancreas to make more insulin. It actually works more like turning down liver's sugar factory. It helps quiet liver glucose production, especially overnight, so that your fasting blood sugars can improve. But metformin, it's not magic, folks. It can cause GI side effects, absorption problems, definitely lowers vitamin B12 over time. So that means people on metformin should be on a B12 supplement, and rarely can contribute to lactic acidosis, which is life-threatening. I've actually seen quite a few cases of people with lactic acidosis. So this is not a recipe for longevity if you don't have diabetes, even though some people may think that. But, I admit medication can be helpful for those who are uncontrolled as a bridge. Now, remember, sometimes medication is necessary so health consequences don't keep adding up while you're working on improving your lifestyle. But medication does not replace fixing the signals that made the liver insulin resistant in the first place. And the most important signal that's overlooked is fat. Fat blocks glucose metabolism, especially excess fat, especially, get this, saturated fat. And that's where the whole lot of internet advice becomes incomplete. People are told to eat fat and protein with carbohydrates to prevent glucose spikes. And sometimes, yeah, that of course will slow the immediate spike because it slows down digestion. But slowing the spike just delays the spike. It's not the same as fixing insulin resistance. If the meal is high in saturated fat, high in refined carbohydrates, and low in fiber, the body will become more insulin resistant. That's the standard American diet. And fat can interfere with how your muscles process glucose. This is why people who eat a high-fat diet avoid carbohydrates. That is how they see lower blood sugar, simply because they are not challenging their system with carbohydrates. But that doesn't automatically mean they are getting insulin sensitive. And there is a huge difference between low insulin because you avoid carbohydrates and true insulin sensitivity because your body can handle the carbohydrates properly. So the real test is what happens when you eat intact carbohydrates. Let's say you eat potatoes, beans, or oats, or fruit. Does that cause a huge insulin and glucose response? Because the problem isn't that those foods are poisonous. Plenty of people eat them and they're thriving. The problem is that the body has lost metabolic flexibility. And that is why the goal is not just to lower your blood sugar today. The goal is to build your body's ability to have metabolic flexibility and eat normal whole food carbohydrates. So that leads to protein overloading. I think we're eating too much protein, folks, and we're replacing protein for everything. Sure, protein is essential. You need protein for muscle, for immune function, for skin repair, for enzymes and hormones. That's not the problem. But it doesn't mean more is better. High protein diets, especially with all the supplements, it stimulates insulin actually. And when protein is eaten in excess, especially in animal foods, especially with high saturated fat, it won't solve your insulin resistance. People can lose weight on a carnivore, very low carb diet because they remove carbohydrates and they remove total calories because their food is a little boring, but it doesn't mean that they have rebuilt their insulin sensitivity. And if someone cannot tolerate beans, fruit, oats, rice, or whole grains without spiking their blood sugars, well, that person isn't metabolically healthy yet. So the goal is not to be afraid of protein. The goal is to eat enough and avoid excess protein while also eating high fiber and building muscle. Better protein sources are those wrapped in fiber. That includes beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, edamame, nuts, seeds, whole grains. And when you eat those, you improve your metabolism. Now, if you have to eat animal sources, eat leaner meats and eat the fiber-rich whole foods with those animal protein. The goal is not a protein obsession. The goal is metabolic optimization. So that brings us to number 7, the gut microbiome. And this may be one of the biggest missing pieces in insulin resistance. Now, for decades, people thought the gut was mostly about digestion and waste. Crap is crap, right? But your gut bacteria, you're constantly sending signals to your liver, your muscles, your fat cells, your immune system, and even to your brain. Your gut microbiome determines how food is absorbed, how inflamed your body becomes when you eat that food, and how full you feel, and how your metabolism responds. So when blood sugar is high, your body isn't simply broken. It is adapting to the environment that you are creating. So if your gut is mostly getting refined starch, sugar, oils, basically low fiber foods with additives, artificial this and that, those ultra processed snacks, that's going to send one set of signals. But if your gut is getting whole food, beans, vegetables, fruit, whole grains, mushrooms, nuts and seeds, it sends a different set of signals. Fiber, folks, is not just roughage. Fiber is information. It feeds bacteria to make short-chain fatty acids, which help regulate inflammation. It downgrades inflammation, and it helps to control your appetite, make you insulin sensitive, and maintain your gut barrier. That's why fiber is one of the most powerful tools for insulin resistance. It changes the conversation between your food, your gut, your liver, your muscles, your immune system, and your hormones. So that brings to number 8, sleep and stress hormone. And this totally matters because insulin does not work alone. Poor sleep can make your insulin stay higher longer after meals the next day. It can increase your cravings. It can raise your cortisol. It can worsen late night eating. It can make the liver release more glucose at the wrong time. And cortisol, let's not fear that. It's not bad. You need it to wake up. You need it to survive. It helps to maintain a healthy blood pressure and to respond to stress. But chronically high Disrupted cortisol levels can worsen insulin resistance. Stress is not just emotional. Poor sleep, sleep apnea, night shift, ultra processed food, chronic inflammation, alcohol, they're all stress. So when your body is stressed, it may push more glucose into the bloodstream because, it thinks you need it. And that would be super helpful if you're getting ready to run from danger. It's not helpful if you're sitting at your desk, barely sleeping, waking up at night, and you have this high fasting glucose. So if you're trying to reverse insulin resistance, sleeping well is not optional. Go to bed earlier, protect your sleep window. Treat your sleep apnea if you snore, wake up choking, have morning headaches, daytime sleepiness, resistant hypertension, or fatigue. Because you cannot out-supplement poor sleep, and you cannot out-medicate a broken circadian rhythm forever. So number 9 is taking medications without a plan to address the root cause. Let me be very clear. Medication can be life-saving and necessary. And people with type 1 diabetes, they need insulin to survive. It's not optional. People with type 2 diabetes may need medication, especially if blood sugars are dangerously high. So never stop your medications on your own. Diabetes medications can prevent emergencies, protect organs, and buy you time to fix your lifestyle. But each of these medications, they work under different mechanisms. Some tell the pancreas to make more insulin, some improve insulin sensitivity, some slow digestion, some mimic gut hormones, some reduce appetite, some help the kidneys move glucose out of the urine, and some reduce the liver glucose production. But because they're so unique, they all have their unique side effects that include low blood sugars, GI issues, fluid retention, weight changes, vitamin deficiencies, urinary tract infections. There really is no perfect medication without side effects. Well, I take that back. Maybe one. We call that food. And food can be powerful enough to change your blood sugar quickly if someone is taking diabetes medication. So if you are on medications, don't just change your diet. Work with your doctor before making major changes. Because if you radically change your diet while you're on medications, that may lower your blood sugars, your numbers can drop too low, and that could be catastrophic. Everything is chemistry, folks. And when it enters your body, it becomes biochemistry. So number 10 is avoid late night eating and not giving yourself metabolic rest. The body was not designed to eat all day long and to be up all night, right? One of the easiest starting points is to create a 12-hour window where you have no calories. And this doesn't mean extreme fasting. It does not mean starving yourself or skipping meals if that causes you to binge later. It simply means stop eating at night and let your body rest. If you sleep 8 hours, stop eating 2 hours before bed and wait 2 hours after waking up before you start eating. That gives your body about 12-hour overnight rest. And remember, no second dinner at 10:30 p.m., no grazing all evening, no sweet drink that's by your bedside, right? Don't wake up to eat unless you have a medical reason. And of course, there are going to be exceptions for people. Certain people have medical conditions where they need to time in their calories. But for many people with insulin resistance, constant grazing keeps insulin high. Appetite signals are dysregulated. So the goal is not to starve, but to eat real food that keeps you full, tells you when to stop eating so that you can rest in between meals. And I get a lot of question about fasting because it seems like a simple in concept to do, but it's really not as simple as it seems. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.